Hey everyone, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Crucible and some of the characters and just sort of go over the main ideas and the main topics that were in Act 1 and Act 2. And so as far as the characters go, a lot of you did a really good job with the credibility of some of the characters. Like everybody pretty much was able to pick out that Reverend Paris is not credible, right? He's greedy, he's paranoid, he is not portrayed as a good person at all. And so he is not credible. We can't trust him, right? You know, he's looking for money, he's looking to protect himself. He's not really having the community's best interest. He's really thinking of himself, and that's it. And then we have Abigail, who clearly also is not credible because her, she, as one person pointed out, she drank blood to cause the death of Mrs. Proctor. I mean, somebody who would do that is clearly not a trustworthy person. And so we know that she's had this affair with John Proctor and that she would like to get rid of Elizabeth because she wants to take Elizabeth's place. Elizabeth is John Proctor's wife. And so we know that she is not credible. She will say and do anything to get what she wants. And she's also kind of a bully, right? She bullies the other girls. She tells them what to do. She slaps them. She threatens them, right? She is not a trustworthy person. Then we have Mr. and Mrs. Putnam, and they're sort of, Mr. Putnam is sort of blinded by his desire for land. So much like Reverend Paris, Mr. Putnam is very greedy, and so he's not very trustworthy. And Mrs. Putnam, poor thing, has lost most of her children in childbirth. She only has one child left. And so she's sort of blinded by her grief. And so she, is very bitter about that. And that makes her a little less trustworthy. And then Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse, there was a specific question about her. She's generally considered the most trustworthy person in the play, and in history. She is, even in history, the historical real accounts of her, she was a very devout woman. She was very kind. She was, very good to her neighbors. And, so she is generally considered a really upstanding, fine citizen. And the fact that she was even accused of witchcraft shows how far the community had gone into hysteria at the time. That anybody could even dream of accusing her of witchcraft is sort of beyond comprehension. Now, as for Reverend Hale, most people said he was trustworthy, which is true, but maybe not 100% because we have him also feeling really good about himself, right? He's like, ooh, I'm an expert and I have all this knowledge from these great universities, and now he's looking forward to showing it off, right? He wants to come and show off all his knowledge in Salem. And so he's partly motivated by, a desire to achieve. But we also have him really looking for the truth. It talks about him really being concerned with the truth and looking for goodness and looking for light. And so his motivation is partly really good, that he wants to make sure, there is no evil in this town, but also partly a little bit, sort of self-serving. But I think he's mostly trustworthy. Now, a lot of people had trouble with John Proctor, and I can sort of understand why, because he does have the affair with Abigail. But I think a lot of people ignored the stage directions about him, because in the stage directions, it talked a lot about how he loves honesty and he has no patience for foolishness. And we already see that because of the affair, he's told Abigail there's no way this is going to continue. He has vowed to stop seeing her, right? He won't talk to her. He won't see her anymore. And so he has clearly regretted his actions and turned away. And he did tell Elizabeth about the affair. Some people were also confused and thought that he lied to Elizabeth about the affair, but he didn't. When she asked him, he said, yes, he admitted the truth. And so we see him being truthful with his wife as well, even though, he knew it would cause problems in his marriage. And so we see him sort of wanting to be honest and feeling guilty for his actions. And so, and at the same time, he's also very logical, and he is looking for sort of some concrete proof for the witch trials. A lot of the people are like, oh, it's the devil. The girls are fainting. And, if we think about the whole premise, these girls are caught doing something they're not supposed to do, and they are, going to be punished for it. So instead of be punished, right, they make up a story. And this is not new. This is not new in history, right? Children don't want to get in trouble, and so oftentimes they lie or make up stories. And so we have them doing this, but of course, in this case, the consequences were dire. They led to deaths of 20 innocent people, whereas, nowadays, if you lie about, no one's going to die probably if you lie about having done something wrong. But we very clearly see that, Abigail and the other girls are lying, because when they're alone, they, talk about what they really did. And we find out that a lot of what they've been telling to the grown-ups is lies. And then only when they're sort of caught in their lies, they sort of admit it, but then pass the blame, right? They blame Tituba. And then poor Tituba, who, did what she was told, right? As a black servant in the, 1600s, if she had said no, she could have been whipped. And in fact, it's not until Reverend Parris threatens to whip her does she start, saying it was witchcraft. And so, the idea is that she wants to preserve her, she doesn't want to be whipped. Who wants to be whipped? And so her trying to protect herself is what leads her to sort of lie about the witchcraft as well. And I think that's all of Act 1. As far as Act 2 goes, most people were able to pick up on the sort of awkwardness between Elizabeth and John. He puts salt in the soup and then lies and said it was well seasoned when he's, of course, the one who seasoned it. And but we see them being very sort of stiff and awkward with each other. And we can trace those roots, of course, back to the affair. And, Elizabeth knows that he cheated on her, and he's been trying to sort of make it up to her ever since, but she doesn't really trust him still. And so there's this, awkwardness between them still. So Mary Warren comes back, and she is coming to bring news from the court. And when we saw her in Act 1, she was scared, and she wanted to tell the truth, because she was like, people are going to hang because of this, Abby. And even somebody pointed out, was really good detail, that she didn't even, join in when they were in the woods. She just stood and watched. And so it shows her as being very passive and not willing to sort of engage in anything dangerous. And so she has changed quite a bit in this Act 2. She comes in and she talks back to John Proctor, and she says, I won't have you talk to me that way anymore, and I won't have you whip me, and you can't do any of these things anymore, because I'm going to be an official of the court. And so we see what a little bit of power has done for her. And so Mary Warren, having gotten this little bit of power, being a servant girl in the 1600s, having gotten a little bit of power makes her feel really good about herself. And so she gets a little bolder, she gets a little stronger. And so speaking of her credibility, I think we're sort of torn on her, because on the one hand, she's really easily led. She'll do anything that Abigail tells her to, either because she's afraid or because she wants that, she wants that recognition. She wants to be praised. She wants the power that she has as a member of the court. But on the other hand, we do see her tell the truth a number of times. She tells the truth about the doll that she made, and she tells the truth that, she just gave it to Elizabeth when she could have lied, right, and said, oh no, she's had it all along. And so we do see her sort of being willing to tell the truth as well. And so is she a strong enough person to sort of stick to the truth? We don't know yet, right? We'll have to wait and see. She does seem, when she's faced with, threats to her own personal safety, she seems to sort of back down. She backed down for Abigail when Abigail, seemed to threaten her, and she backed down for John Proctor when he seemed to threaten her. And so she does seem a little weak in that respect. Let's see, what else was there? As far as McCarthy goes, right, especially if we think about how John Proctor points out that just because somebody is accused, it doesn't mean they're guilty. And just because someone is an accuser, it doesn't mean they're innocent. That really connects to the McCarthy hearings. And if we think about Miller's purpose in writing this play, that he's writing it to point out that what was happening during the Red Scare and the Communist Scare, that Joseph McCarthy and the HUAC committee were, sort of unfairly targeting targeting people, and, people who are innocent of any sort of communist sympathizing, or even people who might, believe in the ideology, but certainly weren't traitors to their country, certainly weren't, spies, or didn't commit treason, that sort of thing, were being punished for, either beliefs, or even, being completely innocent and still being punished. He wanted to point that out. And so we have here John Proctor really sort of being the voice of reason. And so the more we go into the play, the more and more we see John Proctor as a very credible person who is, who does love the truth and who wants the truth to be out, and he is concerned with justice. And so we see him as being sort of the voice of reason in the play, and a lot of the other people as being, sort of, especially Abigail, as being sort of more like Joseph McCarthy, right? Accusing people with unfounded reasons and sort of jumping to conclusions. And of course, she knows a lot of its lies. So we have some other people like Reverend Paris, maybe even, who's also sort of like Joseph McCarthy, accusing people, trying to get, power for himself, and in that way sort of protect himself. And so, we have clear hysteria growing, similar to the, the fear of communism that was spreading through the U.S. in the 50s. And so we have those parallels there. Now, Reverend Hale has, in the very beginning was so, sort of certain with himself. When he is introduced in Act 2, it talks about him looking unsure, that he's not so sure anymore that what he's doing is right. He's not so sure that, he's come here and is going to ferret out this witchcraft, because the way he's seen things happen, it makes him a little bit uneasy. In spite of his uneasiness, and even, again, remember when John points out that a lot of people will lie to save their lives, right? The situation is, if you confess to witchcraft, then you're not killed. But if you say you're innocent, then you're put to death. And so John points out that people might just say they're witches to save their lives. And it said in the stage directions, again, that Reverend Hale also sort of suspects this, but he doesn't really want to admit it to himself. And so he's starting to have his certainty in himself a little bit shaken, and he doesn't really believe as strongly as he did at the beginning. But at the same time, he still says that he believes in the courts, right? The courts are just. The courts are there to find out the truth. And he even says if Rebecca Nurse is innocent, there's no way the court will put her to death, right? That just won't happen. And so we see him again as a man of, he's a minister, and he is a very learned man. And so he believes in the institutions, and he believes that they're going to be upright and just. And it sort of shows his belief in those institutions, whereas John is very skeptical. And so, both are good men, and both sort of have the community's best interests in mind, but we have John as being a little bit more clear-headed because he isn't, again, blinded by his loyalty to institutions that are, of course, only as strong as the men who make them up. And so that's where we leave it at the end of Act 2. One final thing, of course, at the end, John is determined to confess to his affair with Abigail, even if it means that he himself will be put to death. The punishment for adultery in that time period was death. And so there's a good chance that both he and Abigail will be put to death for their crime of adultery. But he is willing to basically do that and, have himself put to death to save his innocent wife and the other innocent people in town. He knows these other people are innocent and they're not guilty of witchcraft. And, particularly he's driven, of course, by concern for his wife, who he also, already feels that he's wronged by having the affair in the first place. And so that brings us to the end of Act 2. So hopefully going forward, you'll be able to have a good grasp on Act 3, and I will probably check back in at the end of Act 3 and make sure that you are up to date.